Terry Butler, Federal Shadow Minister for Water, thank you for speaking with Flow News 24.
Thanks for having me.
We've been talking recently in our broadcast areas in Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia about the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. The concern that's been rising is about buybacks. Now, what is the Labor position on buybacks in the basin, particularly with the federal government saying it's not going to proceed with further buybacks?
Well, at the moment, the question is really how is the federal government going to make sure that the Basin Plan gets delivered? Of course, we saw Keith Pitt late last year saying that the government's position would be no further buybacks. The fact is there haven't been any buybacks under this government for some time. But the clock is ticking on the government. They need to say how they're going to make sure that the plan is delivered. And I think that they have obviously weakened their own bargaining power with that position. But really the question for them is, well, in the absence of that, how are they going to deliver it? And that's true just generally, but it's particularly true when you've got states like New South Wales saying that they're walking away from the Menindee project. You know, it's true when you've got a range of the supply projects not being delivered on time. People want to know what's going to happen to the plan if the various states' jurisdictions don't deliver on their end of it. How is the plan actually going to be met? And if it's not, what is Keith Pitt and the Morrison government going to do about it?
With the 2024 end date, if you like, on the plan, there's this concern that's arisen from various sectors, not just irrigators but environmentalists as well, that there's pessimism that the targets can be reached just solely through water efficiency projects. Does Labor share that pessimism about water efficiency getting us to the targets?
Well, look, it's not just farmers and environmentalists and irrigators who are worried about particularly the 450 gigalitres that's meant to be delivered by efficiency projects. It's also the fact that in last year's Water for the Environment Special Account report, the expert panel said that the 450 gigalitres will not be delivered by 2024. They're as blunt as that. They said, look, of the 450, only 1.9 has actually been delivered. That's less than 1%. And they just said it's not going to be delivered. So I think particularly for your listeners in South Australia, whose jurisdiction really entered the Basin Plan on the understanding that extra 450 gig would be delivered, I think people are rightly asking the question of, well, where is the water going to come from? How is the water going to be delivered? And all Australians would be asking the question, how is it going to be delivered in a way that provides value for money? Now, these are questions for the government. The government is now in its 8th year in office. They've had the stewardship of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan now for so many years, and yet they're heading towards the end date of the plan, sort of shrugging their shoulders, looking around and hoping that someone else fixes it for them. Well, it's on Keith Pitt and the government to deliver. They need to show leadership and they need to talk to the people of Australia and say, well, this is our plan for navigating the next few years and for meeting the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. At the moment, we're seeing some grants, we're seeing a bit of heat and light, but we're just not seeing much in the way of outcomes.
So with the concern the expert panel has raised that we're not going to reach that extra 450 gigalitres, what's being pointed out to us is that legally within the Basin Plan, buyback remains legally available to government to reach those targets, notwithstanding the policy commitment of government. Does that mean, and we've had the New South Wales Shadow Minister for Water for Labor say he believes not only should buybacks be available, but that farmers are saying they want it to be available. Does that leave buyback on the table by 2024?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, the 450 gig is expected to be delivered by efficiency measures, and the government needs to explain what and how they're going to do in relation to that. For the broader targets, then the question really is, well, how is the government going to deal with the fact that some of the 36 supply projects are not just not progressing, but have been taken, well, particularly the Menindee one, has been taken off the table by the state jurisdiction? All of those are the first questions for the government, and then they need to really explain to your listeners and to everyone what that's going to mean for the future. In terms of buybacks, I think a lot of people are really looking around and saying, well, what's going to happen if the water's not delivered? What will happen with communities? And, you know, I think that the Australian government, here's what I'm hearing. People are feeling like they've been consulted. Nothing is actually happening, right? Yeah. So panel after panel, report after report, person after person, going around to communities, saying we're here to listen, and then they listen, they write a report, and then nothing gets done. So I think what people want from the government right now is action. It's all well and good for them to say no more buybacks, but what is the answer? And if the answer is inadequate, then there's just a fact that there's a deadline bearing down on them that they need to face up to.
So I have to ask then, the New South Wales irrigators have suggested that the plan needs to be revised or amended within this Parliament, and that there needs to be an extension of time to be realistic with communities about whether these targets are going to be reached by the deadline. Does Labor have a position on that point of view?
Well, look, we'll be announcing our policy closer to the election. Remember, we're in opposition. The election's not due until next year, and I'd like to know where we're kind of up to with the plan and where things are up to before we announce our policy. We are at the moment focused on holding the government to account. It is on them to deliver. It's Senate estimates this week in the federal parliament, so we'll be asking the government questions about what's happening with the 450, what's happening with the supply projects in the 605, what's happening with the plan, and how they're going to deliver. We'll be holding them to account this week, because ultimately we're not going to let the government off the hook by pretending that we can govern from opposition. We're not going to do that. What we are going to do is we're going to put it squarely back on them. All right, you're the federal government, show some leadership. Deliver for communities, provide certainty, no more tinkering, no more sort of, as I said, minor announcements. Come up with the goods, and as I said, and we'll be taking our position to the next election once we see the progress or otherwise that's been made.
Terry Butler, thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks for your time.